Now, I've posted a link into the chat. So if you want the PDF slides or the references, or you need to do the quiz for CEUs, you will find what you're looking for on that page if you click the link. So just let me know if you can hear me, and I'll pull up the PowerPoint and we will get started. And so far, nobody's answering me. So, oh, there we go. Hello, Wendy from Nanaimo. Kim says yes. Tamara from Nanaimo. Oh, 2 Nanaimos. My goodness. Lots of hellos. Okay, lots of yeses. Okay, great. Yeah, I wish this didn't have such a time delay on it. Oh, another from Nanaimo. We have a lot from BC. This is great. All right. So, hi, Norma Jean. I know Norma Jean. Oh, North Bay, Florida. Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to call up the PowerPoint, and another from Nanaimo. What is it with Nanaimo? And one from Surrey. And Vernon. Oh, my goodness. Vancouver. We could just keep going on like this. Bowen. And Joan from Mississauga. Okay, that's good too. All right. I'm bringing up the PowerPoint. And I have to make this full screen. Just a second. Whoops. Well, I wanted to go there. There we go. Reading view. There we go. And when I check back here, you're all good. And everybody can hear me. Oh, Jennifer, if you scroll to the bottom of the chat, you'll see the link. Actually, I can just post it again. There we go. There we go. Okay, so welcome everyone. Tonight we're going to talk about the pros and cons of intermittent fasting. If you hear a bit of an echo, it's because I have moved out of the spare room and back into my family room, but has very little furnishing. So there's still a nice echo in it, like an empty room often has. Okay, so this is the agenda. We're going to talk about what it is, and that there's 2 different main types, and then within each type there's several subtypes, if you want to call it. We're not going to get into that, but there's different versions of it. And there is a difference starting to show up in some of the research between men and women, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how intermittent fasting may affect the gut, because there's some interesting research with that as well. And then we'll talk about how to balance all this information for your clients, because this is the main reason I think most of you are here. You just want to get a good sense of it from all sides, and therefore when someone is either doing it or whether, you know, maybe you're considering recommending it or something, you just want to know. So, all right, so we'll start with the definition, and it's a pretty loose definition. This just basically means it's a term used for cycling between eating and fasting. That's all intermittent fasting means. It's not about what you eat. So when you start looking through some of the information from the various advocates, you're going to see that there isn't a big, huge focus on what they actually are supposed to be eating when they're eating. There doesn't seem to be, it's almost promoted as eat whatever you like in a lot of places. Now, if someone has a particular leaning a certain way, like for example, intermittent fasting is really big amongst trainers, physical trainers, or fitness trainers, I should say, and many of them are paleo or keto, and they may advocate more of that style of diet. But generally speaking, when you look at the research, they don't talk about it. And when you look at other people who are advocating for it, they don't talk about it either. Although, you know, I'm sure if we asked them, they would all think you should eat, you know, as healthy a diet as possible. So it's really about when you eat. And so this is why it's confusing, because there's various forms of this. It's also known as intermittent energy restriction. Just in case you come across that term, that's another term for intermittent fasting. And as I said, there's basically 2 types. So I'm going to start with the first type, which is known as alternate day fasting, or ADF. And basically you eat what you like every other day, and then you eat nothing on the opposite day, like so one day you're eating nothing, the next day you're eating whatever you like. Sometimes this can add up to 36 hours of fasting. So for example, if you started your fast at midnight, you have 8 hours of sleeping, so that's 8 hours of fasting. Then you do a full 24 hours of a full 24 hours, and then you go right up to, and it varies from places to place, whether you break the fast at 12 noon or whatever to get to the 36 hours, or you break it at 8 a.m. to, it won't be quite 36, it'll only be 30. Wait, is that right? Well, you know what it is. Anyway, so doesn't really matter. It's because there's other versions of this that are even a shorter amount of time. So I don't think it matters whether it's 36 or not. And in one version of alternate day fasting, you eat nothing at all. And then there's a modified version where you can eat up to 500 calories on the fasting day. So you're literally every other day having 75% of what you would typically have. And then there's another modified version where you eat 20 to 25% of what you eat daily. So perhaps, you know, if you're a very large male person who would be eating a normal, you know, 3,000, 4,000 calorie diet, maybe you're you know, very active, whatever, then you would do the 20 to 25% because 500 calories is really not equivalent to somebody who only eats 2,000 calories a day. Now, all of these are considered calorie reduction methods for weight loss. So when you read about them, they are touting them for weight loss. When you read the studies about it, it's about weight loss. So it's all about weight loss. And it makes sense because it's just another way of reducing calories. So instead of reducing calories every single day, you're reducing it in a higher amount every other day. And there's different versions. There's what they call a 5-to-2, which is where you do 5 days of eating and 2 days of fasting. That one is fairly common as well and is often done in research. In reading the research, I did get the impression they were a little afraid of not letting people eat. That sort of comes across. I'm just going to check in with you guys. And oh, Donna's already talking about her fast. We'll get back. We'll get to 3-day fasts. We'll get to that. All right, let me go back to where I was. Okay. So there was one study done where 32 people ate 25% of their normal diet every other day for 12 weeks. It was effective for weight loss. And however, their LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, homocysteine, insulin remained the same. So no changes there. Now, maybe if there'd been a longer time frame, then that would have changed. And they didn't also say, you know, were these people overweight or how overweight they were. So I think the more overweight you are, the more likely you are to see some changes there over a 12-week period than if you don't have too much weight to lose. Now, there was another study, and they were looking at 10 overweight subjects with a BMI of greater than 30, and they also had asthma. And less than 20% of their normal diet was consumed every other day. They lost 8% of their body weight. They also had improved markers for inflammation and oxidative stress. And this would be good news for somebody who suffers from asthma, because those are two areas. So there's oxidative damage in the lungs from having asthma, and of course, it's an inflammatory condition. But they also found that their serum cholesterol and triglycerides decreased as well. Interestingly, or you know, I would expect to see this, their leptin decreased on fasting days. So leptin is the hormone that tells you when you're satisfied from eating, and so that you stop eating or stop having the desire to eat. And it would make sense that this would go down on the fasting days since they weren't eating enough to be satisfied. So the leptin is not going to be sending the signal like it would under normal circumstances. Now, benefits for this, and this is probably And it makes sense to me too. And if you've ever been on a diet, this will make sense to you as well. People find it easier to follow than restricting calories every day. So if you've ever been on any diet that tells you to eat a certain way, you either, are counting carb grams or calories or fat grams or eating only certain foods or whatever kind of diet it is, it's stressful and it's not easy to follow. Whereas this is easy to follow because you just eat what you typically eat on one day, and then on the other day you don't eat nearly as much of that. And it makes sense why it would allow you to lose weight. I mean, I never personally thought of it in this way, that instead of looking at a day of calories, we should be looking at a week of calories. But this is how this works. And so I could see how it'd be very easy for someone to follow, because it's a lot easier to not eat than it is to, like when I say not eat, like not have to prepare any meals, or even if it's only 500 calories, something, small or simple, than it is to have to be making meals all the time. So I understand that one, that I can see very much. Some people have said that they find the hunger issues improve on the fasting days, so they don't stay hungry like all day long when they're fasting, as their body gets used to it. And there was a meta-analysis study that said it was more effective for those who were 50 to 59 years of age in both the male and female categories than other age groups, which again, it's, they're looking at existing studies and then comparing the ages and the results and everything like that. And I mean, I don't know how conclusive that is, but if true, it would be very interesting, because at that age, people kind of really do need to have sort of a reboot of their physical metabolism, if you want to look at it that way. And maybe this might be helping in that regard. Okay, so another study found that alternate day fasting and regular calorie reduction saw the same amount of weight loss and the same reduction for the inflammatory marker C-reactive protein and for insulin growth factor 1, which of course it has been linked to cancer in some cases. Other inflammatory markers like TNF-alpha were unchanged. And it found that it aids weight loss and other metabolic markers associated with weight loss. So one of the things we have to remember, and this is left out of the conversation of intermittent fasting, as it is with ketogenic, as it is with any other topic you want to pick about food. When you lose weight, if you are carrying weight that puts you at a higher risk for certain metabolic disorders, when you lose weight, all the markers do improve. Doesn't matter how you lose the weight. Now, there was a 50-week study of 150 overweight women. I was very excited about this because it was 150 weeks, but it's not as exciting as I thought it was going to be. So they all had a BMI of 25 to 40, and they were doing the 5-to-2 ratio. So 5 days of eating, 2 days of fasting. And on the fasting days, it was 75% of a calorie deficit for them. They also, in this group, that was one part of the group. And then another part, they had a calorie restricted group who just decreased what they typically ate by 20% for calories. And then they had a control group who did nothing. However, it was only a 12-week intervention, so they only did this for 12 weeks. Then there was a 12-week maintenance to see how the weight stayed off or not, and then a 26-week follow-up. So I really would have liked to have seen what happened if they did it for 50 weeks, but they didn't. So the results were that it was a slightly greater results in weight loss for the intermittent fasting. However, there was no difference in the expression of 82 pre-selected genes for fat tissue that are implicated when they have linked obesity to different chronic diseases like heart disease and diabetes. And this is when they were looking at the difference between the IF group and the calorie-reduced group. So the conclusion by the researchers was that intermittent fasting is equivalent but not superior for weight loss and prevention of metabolic diseases. And that was a pretty consistent thing I saw in a lot of the studies. that it was working, but if there was other ways to lose weight, this wasn't considered a superior way. So why does it work? Well, there's one theory is that it gives the body a rest to repair and therefore function better. That's kind of what I was taught about fasting in general, or just what happens when we're sleeping, because technically you're fasting while you're sleeping because you're not eating. And but that's not really, to me, a great theory, although I do believe the body does need to repair. But there's another theory that I thought was quite interesting, and it's basically that during the fasting periods, the cells are under a mild stress, and so they have to adapt their ability to cope with the stress, and this makes them more disease resistant. And we've seen this in nature. We talk about this with the gut, and how the more the gut is exposed to different pathogens and parasites and things like that, the smarter and fitter the good bacteria becomes. We talk about this with antibodies, and obviously the more viruses you're exposed to that the body can build antibodies to, the smarter the immune system is. We see this with plants. When they are attacked by bugs, they get better and more resilient, building higher phytonutrient content. And of course, when they talk about the benefits of exercise, they also talk about this stress to the cells, making people more resistant to disease. So that to me was kind of an interesting concept, and I kind of like it. I don't know what you guys think of it, but I kind of like it as a possibility as to why this might be helpful. Now, the other type of fasting is known as daily intermittent fasting. So you're not doing it every other day. You're just eating within a certain window, and it's also called a daily fast. Now, and again, I'm getting this from the research, not what makes sense to me. So in the research, you'll see information that it can be 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours, or 16 hours. To me, 10 hours is basically what most of us do every day anyway, so that doesn't seem to be of any great advantage. 12, many people do not go 12 hours without eating, so that may be an advantage to some people. But 14 or 16 is probably the more common versions of daily intermittent fasting. Now, when you look at it this way, 8 of whether it's 14 hours or 16 hours is going to be spent sleeping. So that is a natural fasting time, as I mentioned. And so therefore it's not really like, so you were doing a 16 hours, that leaves you 6 hours where you're not eating at some point during the day. That's not, and if you tack it at 3 at the beginning and 3 at the end, that's not too difficult. The same with 14. It's not too hard to do. Did I say? Yeah, I did say that. I meant 6 at the beginning and 6 at the end, not 3. Anyway, so the current fad is 16 hours. So this is where all the hype is coming from, and this is who are advocating it. Again, it's coming out of the fitness industry. And so you have like an 8-hour window. And if you look at this chart on the right, you're basically talking about going from noon to 8 p.m. So that's your window. And essentially, a lot of people describe it as skipping breakfast. So waiting until noon till you eat, and then you eat up until 8 o'clock, and then you stop. A lot of people stop at 8 already. I know other people don't, but in general, most people do stop after dinner. I shouldn't say most people, but many people stop after dinner. Historically, though, it was a 14-hour fast. It's much more well-known. And when I was reading the research, they don't really distinguish between 14 and 16. A lot of them say 14 to 16. So I bring that up because even though the advocates for this are saying 16, the research is saying 14 is just as good. And I like 14, it's easier. 14 is much easier for people. So please keep that in mind. Now, there's one called the lean gains approach, and the only reason I'm mentioning it in particular is because there was a study done with it. So this is from a gentleman named Martin Birkin, And he basically is advocating eating within that 8-hour window. That you can have, and this is where I have a problem with this and other intermittent fasting approaches, because I saw this with others as well. You're allowed no calorie beverages, including coffee and tea. Now, we all know that coffee and tea have caffeine, tea not so much, but coffee for sure, which means that if they're getting up in the morning, you know, they're starting their fast, they're not going to eat till noon, and they're having a coffee in the morning, and then maybe they'll have another one later on, whatever. It's bringing up their blood sugar. It's going to artificially make them feel like they have more energy and are not, you know, needing food sooner. And so I have a bit of a problem with that. If I was fasting, it would be water or nothing, right? If I was going to pick anything, because this is what I was taught with regard to 14-hour fasting, is if you're really desperate, have a piece of fruit like an orange or something like that, either in the evening or in the morning. That's acceptable too. But in this particular approach, they're just saying no calorie beverages. And if the person is doing a workout, and again, this is a fitness person who's doing this, so of course this they would have some rules for working out. If it falls during a fasting period, they can take some branched chain amino acids. They're also encouraged to eat more calories on workout days and eat higher protein as well. So the proponents of this say it's, you know, just magical for weight loss. And it's really, again, when you read the research, there's nothing, like, the research is not screaming, oh my God, this is amazing, successful, how easy is this to lose weight? Like, it's not like that at all. But this is what you're going to see. And the naysayers say that you'll lose muscle mass by not eating frequently. And so what I liked about this study that was done is this is exactly what they looked at. So this is this lean gains approach, and what they looked at was 20 to 30-year-old males for 8 weeks, and they had 5 years of training, including weight. So these are very fit young men who would have muscle mass to lose. So half of the group ate at 1 p.m., 4 p.m., and 8 p.m., which is technically a 7-hour window, not an 8-hour window. The other half ate at 8 a.m., 1 p.m., and 8 p.m., so that's a 12-hour window. They were asked to record their current macronutrients and calories at the beginning of the study. They were told to maintain this level for the study. And when they looked at the macronutrients and calories for the two groups, there was no significant difference. Both groups had adequate protein for hard training, and they trained 3 times a week. So what they found was that neither group had a significant change in lean mass, muscle thickness, or strength. And the intermittent fasting group did lose 1.6 kilos more than the non-intermittent fasting group. So that's over 8 weeks. But they discovered that they actually had a 200 calorie a day deficit in comparison. And when you do the math for losing 1.6 kilos for over 8 weeks, it would work out to be about 200 calories a day deficit that you would need. They also found that they had decreased testosterone, and this is in both groups, decreased IGF-1 levels, decreased insulin and blood glucose, decreased triglycerides, decreased T3, and some decrease in some of the pro-inflammatory cytokines. They had increased cortisol, and I found that interesting, and I'm wondering if that had anything to do with this increased stress theory, that you're putting a little more stress on the system and the cells, or if it had anything to do with the coffee or that they were allowed to consume. So, and again, when they look at the averages of these things, it's not everyone experienced the exact same thing. It's an average. So we don't know that all people had their cortisol levels increased. But these are all things that are seen in a calorie deficit situation. And although this was not these decreases and increases were not significant, It just goes to the theory that the benefit of intermittent fasting is as a weight loss program, and you're seeing results that are similar that you would see if the person's lost weight anyway. I did think it was interesting that they did prove that the muscle mass doesn't decrease, and why should it? People go on weight loss programs all the time and their muscle mass doesn't necessarily decrease if they're smart about it and they're eating sufficient amount of nutrients. So what about women? Well, they did a study of 8 men and 8 women, and they had a BMI of 20 to 30. They were doing the alternate day fasting, so going 36 hours without food. And after 3 weeks, women had slightly impaired glucose response. There was no change in their insulin response, but they were starting to not utilize their glucose appropriately. That's a bit concerning, okay? Because remember, they're not eating. They're not eating well on the days that they do. They are just missing a day for 36 hours. So that's pretty shocking after 3 weeks that they would see a difference like that. The men had no change at all. So this may not be the best type of intermittent fasting for women. So either they're going to do, a straight 24-hour with some food in it, or they are going to do the daily fast type, might be more appropriate. Now, there's also some concerns raised with regards to what happens. So it's known that when women follow low calorie, and in this case, they would be fasting for 36 hours, so that's no calorie, that it can disrupt their gonad, I can't even say it, the GnRH, the releasing hormone for the gonads, which helps you produce the follicle stimulating hormone and the lutein hormone. So this is the pituitary. So this is affecting the pituitary. And this causes or could prevent FSH and LH from communicating with the ovaries and lead to irregular periods, infertility, and poor bone health. So that's a known thing. So the question is being raised whether or not this form of fasting could contribute to that. There's no human study about it, but there is a rat study, and it showed after 3 to 6 months of alternate day fasting, it showed a reduction in ovary side and irregular periods. So again, I don't think necessarily the alternate day fasting, especially the 36-hour, is ideal for women from what we know so far. As I mentioned, there is the 14-hour fast. This is what I was taught 20 years ago. There was no 16-hour, there was just the 14-hour. I've been doing it for years. I don't do it all the time. I can't do it when I get up to teach in the morning. But normally I stop eating somewhere around 9 or 10 in the evening because I'm a night owl. And then I don't eat until noon the following day. When I first started doing it, I had more blood sugar problems, so I would have fruit in the morning and not eat a solid meal until noon. But now my blood sugar is much better, and I actually don't even want to eat until I've been up for a while. So it's really very easy to do, and I quite like it. I did do actual fasting where you fast for several days. I noticed that Donna mentioned that in the chat. I should probably check in on you guys to make sure you're still all there. Oh yeah, you're all there. You're having a grand old time talking. Okay, good. And so I went to fasting retreats. This is many years ago. I won't tell you how long ago it was, but I went to 2, one in Rhinebeck, New York, and the other was outside of Ohio, in Cleveland, in a small town. And I did the one in New York. You arrived on a Sunday and you literally sat in a bed until Thursday morning. You ate nothing, and they gave you, and it's shocking to me today because I would never do this today, they had you drinking distilled water, which of course is the worst of the worst of the worst. And but that's what they thought, like spring water was around. I don't know why it wasn't spring water, but that's what they thought that you should have. And you would break the fast with a cantaloupe in the morning, and then they would give you a big, huge salad for lunch, and then they would send you on your way. So you had no dinner Sunday, and then your first meal was Thursday. And I lost 10 pounds. Of course, most of that was water. I did feel good on the Thursday, and like for the first few days, I felt like you could feel the difference. After I went 24 hours, I had a headache, which is typical. The headache gets a little less on the second day. On the third day, you're really, really hungry, but you don't have a headache anymore, and you feel, because I had done this a number of times after I left this place. I did this on my own. You actually are in a really good mood. There's something about not eating and being really hungry so that all you think about is food that puts you in a good mood, because you don't really care about anything else. Like nothing else is important because you just want to eat. And but it always made me in a good mood. I don't know why. And the other one I went to, I did it for a week. And when I say a week, I got there Sunday, left there Saturday. And I, again, can't say that I noticed anything. I mean, I didn't have any health issues, so I can't say that it did anything for me one way or the other. But it was an interesting experience. And what I met there, and that was probably the most interesting part, were other people who were there for longer periods of time with serious health issues. So in New York, there was a girl there who had been fasting for 6 weeks, eating nothing and drinking distilled for 6 weeks. And there was similar people like that when I was in Ohio as well. And that was kind of shocking, and I don't think I would ever do that or advocate that, even though I was taught that there was a theory that if you did a month of not eating anything at all, it would cure anything, which doesn't make any sense to me now today with what I know. And so anyway, so this is why I like the 14-hour fast, because you're not making big decisions. It can be done every day. And when you think about what the body might like, I think it would like a rest every day, not 3 days in a row for twice a year or how often ever people do it. So as I mentioned, many of the daily fasting sites say 14 to 16 hours is the window for fasting. It's pretty easy to do. Some of the research says that even 12 hours shows benefits. So again, if you've got a client who just can't do 14 or 16, there's no reason to discourage them from doing it. Maybe 12 hours is what they need. And what I like about this is you have options here that allows you to make it good for the client. My biggest problem with the 16-hour fast advocates is, how people are. They'll think they're failing if it's only 15 hours and not 16 hours, and you just can't control your schedule all the time. And even though you have a shorter window for eating, and you're not eating as often because you're not going to do small meals more often, you don't have enough time, you still have things that happen, and you can't hit time frames exactly in a given day. So I hope that we would encourage people not to be so black and white with it, and because the research doesn't support black and whiteness. All right, so there was a study that showed a potential decrease in the risk for breast cancer with intermittent fasting. And they looked at 3,061 non-diabetic women. And they basically controlled for the other breast cancer factors so that those weren't at play. And they followed them for 4 years. And during that time, there were 520 new breast cancer events and 659 deaths during a study follow-up. They looked at how much nighttime fasting the various women did. And when they looked at it, the average time was 12.5 hours. But as I said, with an average, you've got, everybody has different amounts, and then it works out to being 12.5. But what they did see was every 2-hour increase in nighttime fasting saw a 0.2 unit decrease in HbA1c. So if you're not familiar with HbA1c, it is the blood test that measures blood glycation. It is the gold standard test for type 2 diabetes, because it's your HbA1c levels that determine what kind of comorbidities that you get. And it's the comorbidities that kill you, not the diabetes itself. So this determines whether you get kidney disease or heart disease or liver disease or cancer or whatever. And so what they saw was that, like some people in the study might only have gotten 4 hours if they went, and their levels were at such a rate that if it was 6 hours, it was 0.2 difference, and if it was 8 hours, there was another 0.2 drop, and then it just kept going. So that was kind of interesting that we're seeing this relationship with sleep and therefore fasting, and we have to consider the time that we sleep as fasting, and that there is a benefit going on with regards to HbA1c. They didn't find any difference in C-reactive protein, but they did find that women who fasted less than 13.1 hours had a 50% higher potential for having a breast cancer event. And so I thought this was interesting because, as I was just saying, I think 14 hours is a good amount for intermittent fasting if you're going to do it. And this 13.1, well, if you're doing 14, you're over that amount, you're good. They also did find that nighttime fasting duration was not associated with mortality. So even though they may have gotten breast cancer by, fasting less than 13.1 hours, it didn't necessarily mean that they would die from breast cancer. So the conclusion of the study was that increasing the nighttime fasting could be a novel strategy for improving blood glucose and decreasing breast cancer risk. Again, so basically what we're seeing with a lot of these studies, there doesn't seem to be anything, a downside to it, other than what we saw with a bit of with the alternate day fasting in women. And then, of course, the circadian rhythm version of intermittent fasting we have to talk about. So if you saw the chronobiology webinar I did back in November with Kathy Biasi, she touched upon this, that those who are looking at the timing of things that we do during the day, when we should eat, when we should exercise, when we should take medications, when we should sleep, all these sort of things. That there's many different rhythms the body has, and they're tied into the circadian rhythms. I'm not a big fan of this in general, which I'll talk about, but they have looked at that with regard to intermittent fasting as well. So in this particular study, it was men with pre-diabetes, and it was a crossover study. So, first half the group was doing intermittent fasting, and then they switched, and then the group that started out not doing intermittent fasting switched to intermittent fasting in the second part of the study. And of course, they would have a washout period, so there were no carryover effects in this type of study. And so basically half ate during a window of 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. So that's a 6-hour window, which really, and then the control group ate between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., which is a 12-hour window. Now, I don't know about you, but the idea that I would eat all my food for the day and be done by 2 p.m. isn't going to work for me. I don't even get up till 9. So I just told you I eat at noon. So 2 hours to stuff all my food into me, it's not going to happen. Now, when Kathy was talking about it, and she'd been speaking to some of the chronobiology researchers, they were saying it was 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. would be the circadian rhythm window for eating. Still too early from my perspective, and but you can see it's distinctly different than what most intermittent fasting people are advocating, which is a noon to 8 p.m. 8-hour window. But what they found in this particular study is that it lowered insulin, blood pressure, evening appetite. So they found as they went on, they were less hungry, and oxidative stress. It improved insulin sensitivity and then beta cell responsiveness. So remember that people who have type 2 diabetes eventually go on to be insulin dependent because their beta cells stop making the insulin. So obviously improving that would be a good thing. So what was interesting about this is it wasn't dependent on weight loss. So it's the first study to show that eating within a certain time frame had an improvement without weight loss, because all the rest you could attribute the other improvements of the metabolic markers to weight loss. However, in this study, it didn't state how many men in the abstract, it didn't say how many men participated. So it could have been 3 men for all we know. Could have been 100. We don't know. And there are other studies have shown that any type of circadian rhythm disruption is linked to inflammation and metabolic disorders. And so it also is about sleep and where and how and when you sleep. And they didn't acknowledge this. So when I was looking at it and reading more about it and some other articles on circadian rhythms, they talk about using this method as a means of resetting your circadian rhythms if they're off, as opposed to a necessity as to how you eat. So if we look at our ancestors, they would not have been eating between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. There's no way they would be, first of all, worrying about that much food in that short a window. When daylight was so valuable to them, they would have been maximizing daylight as much as possible, not just for eating, for other activities, and they would definitely have been eating later in the day. But they would have been going to bed and following a consistent schedule day after day after day, and probably living well within their circadian rhythms, and therefore not needed a reset of this nature. So think of this more, it might be something you do to reset your circadian rhythms, which could be helpful for metabolic markers, and not necessarily something you need to do if you haven't messed up your circadian rhythms. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so what about the gut? Well, there's quite a bit about intermittent fasting in the gut. A lot of it's animal studies. So there's a mouse study where they gave the mice multiple sclerosis and then had them intermittent fast. And what they found is that it increased the gut bacteria, in particular, those 3 families. So your lactobacillus and your Bacteroides and your Prevotella are all within those families, different strains. And so that was interesting. It enhanced the antioxidant microbial metabolic pathways. So that's good. So less oxidative stress. And this was the one that was interesting. The intermittent fasting reduced IL-17, which is a pro-inflammatory type of T cell, and it increased the very beneficial regulatory T cells, which if you have sufficient regulatory T cells, you do not have an autoimmune condition, you do not have allergies, you do not have any reaction to IgG antibodies for your foods, you don't have a lot of inflammation because regulatory T cells regulate inflammation as well. So that was really interesting that it improved the bacteria, and in turn improved these elements as well, because the connection between your inflammatory T cells and your regulatory T cells and gut bacteria is well established. Now, fasting periods are common in human and animal history. So, you know, we've been doing it for years, and many religions still do it to this day. And animals certainly go through periods of fasting as they're looking for food. They did show, there was one study about rats showing that if they fasted every other day, it increased their lifespan by 30%, and they attributed this to calorie reduction. Of course, the idea that calorie reduction increasing lifespan has been around for quite some time, except new research shows that it isn't actually the calorie reduction that is responsible for the increase in lifespan. It's the lower protein levels. So we eat way more protein than we used to. And when they look at vegetarians or other groups of people who eat lower amounts of protein, I shouldn't say people, I should say animals, because they've only done these studies on animals. You can't study humans this way, because we have to wait till we, you know, live our life, and our lifespan's too long for a study. But they found that it's protein, and that makes sense why that would work with intermittent fasting as well, because if you're fasting every other day, you are decreasing your protein too. You're decreasing all your calories, therefore some of those calories would be from protein, so you're decreasing that as well. Many the metabolic issues that we've been talking about, like heart disease and diabetes, and inflammatory conditions and things like that are related to the disruption of the circadian rhythm. So again, this is well established that if you have a disrupted circadian rhythm, you're more prone to different diseases. And what they found is that gut bacteria activity, it has a change in what it does and how abundant they are through the day and the night. So for example, there is a bacteria called Enterobacter aerogenes, which has been linked to infections. And it increases in the presence of melatonin. So again, its cycle is directly related to our sleep cycle. They also found that with lactobacillus strains, which of course are beneficial bacteria, that they increase while we sleep and decrease while we are awake. So, and then there's my friend Archimantia muciniphila, and I think I put that in there just to force me to say it, which is a beneficial microbe that aids weight loss. So there's a lot of talk about this particular strain of bacteria, and it is, they're finding other benefits for it as well. It's not available in a supplement yet. I think there is one in Germany, but not here yet. I won't be surprised if it shows up in a supplement. But it's also been shown to be beneficial for inflammatory bowel issues and leaky gut, and it increases during fasting periods too. So whether you're fasting or it's your sleep fasting cycle, it doesn't matter. This is when it's more likely to replenish and reproduce in greater numbers. And it's really very helpful. It feeds off the mucus layer and then in turn helps rebuild it. So we talked about in a previous webinar when I was talking about you know, the mucus lining and how it protects the gut lining so that pathogens and molecules can't lock onto it and trigger zonulin and open up the gut. So this is a particularly beneficial one that helps protect all that. And that's how it helps to prevent leaky gut as well. And you're going to have it if you have a fasting period, especially a good one at night that, you know, follows your circadian rhythms. So looking at all of this and looking at these different strains, because people get caught up sometimes with strains. One of the things I was reading is that they have this concept that all of our common cell gut bacteria, which is our residential bacteria, that which is native to us, actually act together like a mega organism. And you're going to see a response from this mega organism to the host signals in a 24-hour period. So when we talk about certain strains, both good and bad, being increasing while we sleep and decreasing while we're awake, and then there'll be others, so it'll be vice versa. It's because there's a whole kind of symphony of stuff happening, and all these players are playing a role like it's one big organism, not individual strains. And so I think what we're going to start to see is more and more strategies that promote the concept of allowing our own gut sort it all out and build up strains, and that we have to follow certain basic biological processes like maintaining our circadian rhythms, like eating on a consistent basis, sleeping on a consistent basis, the quality of the foods that help feed organisms, things like that are going to play more of a role. And it's not, doesn't mean we aren't going to use probiotics, because they are helpful in the short term and can be helpful for specific issues. But I think from an overall health perspective, we're going to see more focus on the group of bacteria as opposed to individual strains. Now, they have linked a lot of this to melatonin. They've even found melatonin in the gut, and they think it might be setting up this pattern for the common cell bacteria in some sort of signaling process. And they basically feel that following a consistent feeding schedule, which is where the intermittent fasting may come in, might help mitigate melatonin disruption. It would also include, you'd have to have a regular sleep cycle too. But this might be one of the best benefits of intermittent feeding, because you're forced into that 8-hour window or even 10-hour window. If you're doing 14-hour fasting, you've got a consistent feeding schedule to a certain degree. There was a mouse study that found time-restricted feeding prevented weight gain, improved diversity, and circadian cycling of gut microbes. So the gut microbes also respond to a circadian rhythm as well. And in this case, they were being fed a high-calorie diet. So they were trying to make them gain weight, and they didn't. And the control group, so those who were eating what they call ad libitum, which means they eat whenever, they gained weight. They also, with this control group, ended up having more of the obesity-associated bacteria. So there are specific strains that can take more calories from food, and they've linked that to obesity, and that people who are suffering from obesity, or animals, because basically they've been looking at animal models, have more of these types of strains than those who are lean. And what they found is that these obese strain bacteria was actually quite consistent day or night, so making it even more difficult. They couldn't just start trying to reverse what they had done to the mice and have it help them. It didn't work that way. Other studies show that intermittent fasting of 12 hours or more can improve diversity of your bacteria strains. And again, that's good news, because again, what if the person can't do 14 or 16? 12 hours is good. It can increase tolerance against bad bacteria and restore the integrity of the intestinal epithelium. And in another study, they had salmon-infected mice who did alternate day fasting, and they found that it cleared the pathogens faster than the controls. So there is some merit to giving the bacteria a period of time where they're not being fed either. There's another mouse study that found intermittent fasting protects the gut against negative impacts of stress and inflammation. Another study found that alternate day fasting increased lactate and acetate, which increases the browning of white fat tissue. And when you brown your white fat tissue, it's better for insulin sensitivity. And that human studies have already confirmed that browning of fat does occur by gut bacteria. So again, from the production of lactate and acetate. One of the theories they have about fasting and why it might be beneficial for the gut is that bad bacteria often has a shorter doubling time and are more likely to starve during a fasting period. And beneficial bacteria have a longer doubling time, so it's easier for them to survive. But as we saw with some of the other research, because of the circadian rhythms, they aren't necessarily, you've got good and bad doing stuff all the time throughout the day. But I think that based on all of this, I think a 12-hour fast should be the way to go. And then if you can do 14, great. If you want to do 16, that's up to you, but or the client. But there's certainly some merit here. And what's never talked about is the quality of the diet. And I think this is just as important, especially when it comes to the gut and overall health. And so I think this is something we can bring to this to help clients, that it's, it's not a free pass that you eat within this window of opportunity and you're going to lose weight. No, I think they have to still pay attention to, eating better quality foods. So some of the cons for intermittent fasting are most people would not recognize their blood sugar is off, especially if they're drinking coffee and tea. So they may not be as aware that it's not working for them the way they might like it to be. This seems to be less problematic for women, for men, I should say. Alternate day fasting needs to be seen as a calorie reduction diet. It's just in a different form. But it may work better for some people because it's easier to do than following a calorie restrictive diet. And then I would suggest that when you're discussing this with clients, that you watch out for people with dysglycemia, because they aren't even aware they have dysglycemia. They're not aware, of their mood swings and, some of the symptoms related to it. And so they may try this and not see that it's not working for them because they aren't aware they have dysglycemia in the first place. And then the other thing is the claims. The claims on the sites for intermittent fasting are way too big. They act like they'll say, oh, it improves brain function and, reduces blood sugar and improves insulin sensitivity, and they act like it's fact, and it's not. It's just some indicators that could be linked strictly to weight loss. and they're not accounting for that, and it's not huge difference when compared to, you know, other forms of weight loss and calorie reduction. Just huge claims that I read, and it was kind of shocking how they were acting like it was fact. So I think that's probably the biggest con against intermittent fasting. There are definitely some pros to it, but this is what we have to watch out for. So in terms of pros, if a person loses weight, this is under any circumstances, all metabolic markers will improve. So if intermittent fasting is the way to do it, that's great. It may make it easier to keep it off because you can continue to intermittent fast ongoing. So if it's working for someone, that might be very helpful. Giving the body a rest has always been considered a good thing, and I think it still is. But I think the 14 hours is more reasonable. So in conclusion, there's definitely something to this, which may be of value to you or your clients. Just don't believe all the claims that are being made. The research is just not there to support it. It could help reset the circadian rhythm of the gut microbes, which would be an extremely beneficial thing. And it could be an easier way to lose weight for some people. The body definitely needs a rest. And we just don't have enough information to know how much you can play with this. This includes the circadian rhythm. I'm not 100% convinced that they know exactly what we're supposed to be doing. They're basing on the circadian rhythm on who we are today. And they have no research has been done is like what happens when somebody is consistent with the time they go to bed and the time they get up, but it's different from what is being advocated by, you know, people who are suggesting we follow circadian rhythms. Like what happens if you go to bed at 1 in the morning consistently, as opposed to, I think they recommend between 10:45 and 11:15. Like how do they get 10:45 to 11:15? Like I think there's more to know there. So what this means is we're still dependent on the client determining what's best for them. I just hope that with this information, you feel a little more freedom to, you know, play with things so that they can figure out what to do. And it may be something you want to play with yourself just to see how you feel, because I'm sure you'll learn something. And that's the end of my presentation. So I'm coming back to you. And we will see. All right. So you guys have been busy. I'm trying to see if there's any questions. See, this is what happens when you guys have a conversation. I can't find the question. Salmonella, not salmon, Dana. I think you're talking about the Archimensia muciniphila and where you might be able to get it. Pamela's saying, I think, again, you're talking about the Archimensia muciniphila. It can't be given orally because it's an anaerobe, but most probiotics are anaerobes anyway. So that they would find a way to stabilize it the way they do other probiotics. So Pamela's saying, so we need to feed this bacteria versus take it in from the outside. In a perfect world, that's exactly how you would do it. But that doesn't mean there aren't benefits to when you take it from the outside, such as in fermented foods or probiotics, because that's been demonstrated too. Chinese clock, TCM, different times that different organs cleanse during sleep rest related to circadian rhythms. Yeah, there's a lot of information coming out about that. Sherry saying, Evan had a question about the browning of fat. Where is that? So I'm not sure about high production of the morning drawn from blood. No, that's not the question. I don't see it. Boy, you guys were busy. Oh my God, were you even listening to me? Um, any research on intermittent fasting while pregnant? I didn't see any. And Kimberly is saying, so is black coffee in the morning not allowed when fasting? Those advocates for it say that it is. I'm saying I don't think it's a good idea. I'd rather see, if somebody was going to do anything, I'd rather see them eat half a grapefruit or something like that, or an orange or something that's delivering some nutrients and is really super easy to digest, maybe some blueberries or something. Yeah. Jennifer says, between intermittent fasting and modified keto, cholesterol dropped better than medication. Personally, no other type of diet worked. Again, one of the things we have to learn to distinguish is between acute and long-term. And what we're seeing is a lot of these things are good in the acute, but they don't pan out in the long term. But for example, in your case, if it's dropped, you may find that long term you don't have to worry about it because you came up with an answer and sort of reset yourself, if you want to look at it that way. And I think that that's one of the takeaways I was hoping to get from, that you would get from this, that there's a resetting that might be possible with this. The browning fat question was, how does the browning of fat work when the human body only contains 1%? This is not brown fat. The browning of fat is not brown fat, because that's what I thought when I first read that it's our brown fat, but no, it's a metabolism. If you look at the PowerPoint presentation, if you go look at the slides for that particular section, there's actually a little diagram there that shows it. And no, it's a way of utilizing the white fat more than it is. It's not brown fat. Donna says, I found fasting helped me more than it does now. I'm discovering food sensitivities are preventing from my edema dermatitis from healing. I'm hoping IF will help more extended something. I don't know what that word is. Looks like it did, but I don't think that's what it is. IF and athletic performance. Again, when you get into it, you'll find that there are specific workout recommendations, and they vary. Some people say to do the workout before you start. Sorry, I'm losing my voice here. That working out before you start your day is good, but then they were recommending the branch chain amino acids for that time frame. But other people work out later in the day. Again, this is the problem. We're all different, and there's no one way to be in order to have the right. Sorry, I didn't turn my camera back on. Sorry. To say that one way or another, this is the best way for athletes or whatever. Nikki says, folks combining keto and intermittent fasting are adding fat to their coffee for calories, but low sugar. Yeah, I've heard that too, and that's supposed to stabilize the blood sugar. But again, if you're doing intermittent fasting, you can't be adding fat to the coffee before you start your eating, if that makes sense. Wendy's saying, Dr. Fung out of Toronto treats diabetes. He is a nephrologist and treats people with kidney diseases. He is a good one to follow, as he's studying this all the time, and it could be a reference perhaps. So I'll look him up. Nikki says, folks that do keto along with it, okay, we already did that one. Coffee in the morning, but the fat, although low, and does contain calories and breaks the fast. That's correct, yes. Intermittent fasting for children or teenagers. Well, again, why? First of all, I'd be careful with kids because they are growing faster than we are, and they reproduce their cells faster, and they need more fuel than we do. And I don't think, we should be. See, this is the problem I have. The people who are doing intermittent fasting are people like ourselves where our appetite has been messed up and we don't follow our natural food cues, and children still have it. And I think it's really important, if they still have their natural food cues and we haven't forced them into, some sort of structure where they're eating when they're not hungry, we should let it ride. I think they'll be better off in the long run. And Heidi is saying it's not recommended for children. Tamara is saying that Dr. Fung is amazing, and she agrees with Wendy. Okay, so I don't know if I got to all the questions. As I said, you guys were very, very busy. This was a very popular topic. I had a lot of people sign up for this webinar, and I was kind of surprised. I thought it was a pretty straightforward topic. My overall view is, I would certainly not necessarily discourage someone from doing intermittent fasting, but I would be paying attention to what they're eating. Sorry, my throat is dry here. So hopefully, Nikki says, my chat posts all got deleted. No, actually, I saw that when I checked in the other time. I saw that Dr. Mercola reference. I had mentioned that Dr. Mercola follows Dr. Jason Fung's studies on intermittent fasting and goes 20 hours fasting. He eats at 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. and fasts between 5 p.m. until 1 p.m. But some of the benefits of 12 to 18 hours are doing a 12 to 18 hour fast are apparent too. Best approach for insomnia. Intermittent fasting? I don't know. I read some people, if they're hungry, they can't sleep. I know I can't sleep if I'm hungry. Joanne says, thank you, Lorene. Great info. Wendy says, except that children keeping them to a good diet, having them not eat in the evening and getting a nutritious breakfast is like an intermittent fast. From a 12-hour or 14-hour point of view, that is true, Wendy. Heidi says, look at the blood sugar first, always. Kate says, I get asked about this topic. Thank you for all the info and the references. I found it very interesting. Jennifer says, I've been using coffee plus MCT oil, which is high in caprylic acid, which is anti-candida, but also fat buys me some extra time in the morning before I break my fast. I can fast about 12 hours this way, but feel deprived without the bulletproof. That's what that MCT oil added to the coffee is. Okay. Shanita says, thank you, Lorene. Overall, you would recommend 14 hours of fasting. It's pretty simple to do, yes. PGX is a good to keep blood sugar low, but it's expensive. That's a fiber supplement. And Nikki says, thanks. Sherry says, I was mainly interested to catch any of your thoughts or shares regarding diabetes. I've heard some studies showing great benefit. Takeaways are browning of fat and 0.2 unit decrease in HbA1c for every 2 hours increase in nighttime fasting. Thanks, as always, for a great webinar and slick slides. Really? I don't think they're slick. Okay, Wendy's saying she learned some stuff too. Good. All right. Okay, so if you don't have any more questions, I'm glad you could all attend, and I will send out the replay tomorrow. Really, really, Sherry says. Okay. I'll send out the replays. If you haven't checked out the web page with the references and the slides and the quiz, the link will take you directly there. Nikki says, thanks for great info. I sent you an email requesting login info for your gut health program. Can't get in. Okay, I will check that out. And great. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and we'll see you the next time.